So a couple of months ago, I had this song that was just stuck in my head. And you know, sometimes we have those earworm type songs with the catchy little hook and the chorus. It just gets stuck in your head and you can't get it out. But this wasn't one of those typical songs that do that. In fact, this is a song that came out over 20 years ago, and I probably haven't even heard it since then. But it's the song "When You Believe," and it was from the Prince of Egypt soundtrack. If you remember that movie, it was a came out in 1998. It was an animated tale of the story of Moses and how he was grew up in Egypt and then eventually freed the Israelites from their slavery. And I couldn't figure out, like, why is this song just stuck in my head? Like, I haven't heard that thing in years, and I was constantly having to listen to it. I couldn't get it out of my head for days. And then about a month ago, I was reading, this happened to be reading something and reading about Moses and the Israelites, and I started picturing that moment where, and they show it in the movie where they're singing that song. And it's them packing up, like, the Egyptians are finally, it's like, fine, we'll let them go, just get out of here. God's done all the plagues, and Egypt is finally just given up, and so the Israelites are packing up and they're celebrating and they're singing the song, and I imagine that's probably what it was like, that they were probably worshiping and singing praises and just so excited because they've been stuck in slavery for generations. But throughout that time, that they had a promise from God that they were going to be freed, that somebody was going to come by and come along and free them from their slavery and lead them to this promised land. So they were excited about what God was about to do. But then comes the moment of the Red Sea. And if you know the story, they come up to the sea, and there's nowhere to go. How are they going to cross this sea? And then here come the Egyptians up behind them. And so immediately they just said, oh, you just let us out here to die. We're going to, we'll be better off back there in Egypt. And because from one moment they were excited and worshiping and about what God was about to do in their lives, and then they hit their first obstacle, and they immediately want to just give up and just go back to where they came from. And but God had other plans. So Moses raises his staff, and the water parts. And one of the biggest miracles that's in the Bible, the most well known. In fact, so much so that they mention it over and over again throughout the Old Testament, always saying, remember when God did this. Remember when God parted the Red Sea. And if you've ever seen the Prince of Egypt, they do a beautiful depiction of it where the Israelites are walking along the dry land. There's just water on either side, just like walls, and fish swimming around. It's like being in this giant aquarium without the glass in between. Like, you can probably reach in and touch the fish if you want. And I don't know how it was like that, but it was a cool depiction. But they get all on the other side of the sea. The Egyptians are still there, and the water comes crashing down and takes out the Egyptians. So the Israelites are free, completely free. They've been free from the slavery, and now they're free from the Egyptians because they can't come after them now. So I'm sure, again, they're praising and worshiping and singing songs and excited about, all right, God's going to fulfill his promise. But then they just keep running into more obstacles and more obstacles. They become hungry. They become thirsty. It's taking longer than they thought. And they just want to give up. And the whole time they keep saying over and over again, Moses, you led us out here to die. I think we were better off in slavery in Egypt. And you could sit there and think and go, why were they that way? Why did they think that? Did they not just see these big miracles that God has done? Like, do they just remember what God did back there at the sea? It's huge. Don't you think he'll take care of you now and get you through this now and fulfill his promise? But I got to thinking, like, that's kind of how we are. We live a life of maybe monotony. We get up every morning, we get ready, have breakfast, go to work, come home, take care of the kids, get them to bed, get ourselves to bed, and start the day over again the next day. And in some things, we just feel like we have no purpose. And we feel enslaved to that ritual. And then the moment that God calls us into something, whether it's into some kind of ministry or just something that we feel like, oh, sounds awesome, and maybe it's a ministry, maybe it's a new job, that you feel like God's given you. Maybe you move to a new place. Maybe it's just a new year and you feel like, I have hope for this year. But then the obstacles come and you say, this is harder than I thought. Maybe I should have just stayed back there. Maybe I should just go back to the way things were. And a lot of times we do that. We tend to just give up on our dreams. We give up on the things that we felt God maybe called us into, and we just fall back into that enslavement of just complacency. Or maybe it's just a sin or a burden that you're carrying that you're just like, I don't know how to get rid of this. And sometimes it's scary to let that go and to realize that God can get you through it and heal you from it. Several years ago, my wife had this vision of someone in a cage, or maybe in a prison cell, and probably praying like, God, free me from this, free me from this, free me from this, wanting to be freed, just like the Israelites did. And God makes a way, opens the doors, and says, come to me. But we feel so comfortable in where we are and so afraid of what's out there that it seems like an obstacle, seems like too much. And maybe I'm better off in here. So we stay stuck. Freedom's there. The doors are open. All we have to do is walk out. And we just have to make that choice. So many times we hear of stories of people who have even actually been in prison or who have been enslaved in one way or the other, and because things seem scary and different out there when they get out, or they run into certain obstacles, they're like, well, I was better off back. Maybe I was better off back there. That doubt starts to set into their mind. So what is it for you today? What is it that you feel like you've been enslaved to? Or maybe you've ran into some issues. You've stepped out and got excited. I know even this year, we got excited about what God's going to do in this year. And then things started to happen, and things weren't happening. And of course, then we run into where we are today, where, where things are different now. And we go, maybe this year is going to be as great as we thought it was going to be. And we feel like giving up. I know like 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, my wife and I moved to a new church, and it was so exciting. And I remember for a couple of years before that, things were happening at our other church. We loved that church. We didn't want to leave the church. We felt great there, and we couldn't figure out, like, we kept asking God, like, do you want us something new? Because of the shifts, and in those moments we felt like we need to ask and pray and ask about it, and we kept hearing no and no and no and no. My wife got a job at another church, and we kept praying, do you want us to go there? We kept hearing no. And then one day he said yes. So we got excited, because through all that time we started building this idea of what God can really do through us. God was growing us. But then we moved to the new church, and it was like, it wasn't so exciting anymore. Things weren't going how we thought they were. Not just in the church itself, but personally, things started happening that was preventing things from happening even in us that we thought, and it became a struggle. And there are many times that we thought, well, maybe we were better off back there. Or even several years before, a few years before that, when we decided to move to a new town where we lived. We both grew up there. We had our parents that lived there, and we couldn't, it was easy to have childcare. We go on date night, hey, can you watch the kids? Or we had this going on, let's watch the kids. But we knew we needed to move into something new. Several years before that, a few years before that, we had just moved to another church. We were comfortable in the church we were in, but we just felt like stuck. And God called us into another church. We got excited, but we were having that issues, the complications of because it was in another town, and we were having to constantly travel and go there. And it may be only 20, 30 minutes, but I was working there, and I was going there every day, and sometimes 2 or 3 extra times a week to go to church and get involved. And that started running into conflicts, but then that's why we moved. And when we did, we started running into those issues of like, what do we do with the kids when we want to go on date night? What do we do with the kids when we have something going on at the church? What, how do we want to handle this stuff? And God kept providing for us. And in these last few years, we just kept going. But each step of the way, we go, are we better off? Should we stay there? Even now, sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if we just stayed where we were instead of going to that other church like 10 years ago? Or if we didn't move and we stayed back home where we were, what would have happened? Were we been better off? And sometimes we have that doubt even now. Like, would I have been better off? But we have to do is when we hit that issue, we're having that issue of maybe we feel like, things aren't going how we thought. Maybe we run into a financial wall. Maybe we run into an issue in our marriage or with our kids or in some other kind of relationship. Maybe we run into some kind of sickness and we don't know how we're going to get through it. It can be so easy to say, I was better off back there. I was better off in slavery. I was better off in living that life. Because maybe that stuff happened because you stepped out. I know many pastors, many of you out there may be hearing, maybe you stepped out into a new church. Maybe you stepped out into some kind of new ministry for those who are just in the ministry that aren't pastors. Maybe you just cast a new vision and you stepped out and you just met resistance. And you're saying, this is maybe we'll just go back. We'll just go back. We'll take a step back. And you don't feel like you could move forward. Don't give up. Remember what God done. That's why, because the Israelites had already forgotten about Red Sea, even just, in their travels. It was the same generation. So generations to come, they started reminding everybody, say, remember what God did. He'll get you through this. And we have to do that. We have to look back and think of the miracles God's done in our lives. And sometimes they may not be small. We want to think miracles are the big moments where the Red Sea parted or the sun stood still or, whatever. But the same God that did those things and the same God who rose Jesus from the dead is alive today. And in fact, the Bible says the same Spirit that rose Jesus from the dead lives in us if we choose to receive it. So we have to remember that. And sometimes it's in the small things, that we may not think as miracles, but they really were. That God came through for you. That God provided for this, provided for that. Brought healing in places, brought healing in your marriage, or brought healing in this part of your marriage, and maybe you're still struggling with other parts, but you're like, you know what, God brought healing here, so He can bring healing over here. And maybe you've stepped out into some new ministry, a new job, or whatever it was, and it's gotten harder. And if you feel like that's what God's called you into, don't doubt it. Keep pushing forward. Keep remembering what He's done, and keep remembering the promise. For the Israelites, it was to go into the promised land. And for them to get there, they had to do a lot of traveling. They had to go through a lot of struggles. And in the end, they even had to step into a place where they knew was dangerous, where the people there could easily just kill them all. And they didn't step in. They had to wait a whole other generation before that promise was fulfilled because they didn't want to. So don't just give up on the promise. Don't delay the promise because you're so afraid and you just want to go back. And don't go back. And I'm telling you this out of experience. I still do it myself. Sometimes I still, just the other day I was thinking about that. I was driving back in my old hometown and going, what if we had stayed here? I still have those thoughts. Sometimes I still want to give up. Sometimes I still want to maybe even just go back to bed. It was more comfortable there. Why do I have to get up and deal with this? Why am I having to go to work? Why am I having to push my kids with their schoolwork or whatever issue we're having? I just want to go back to bed. Just remember what God's done and share your story. That's the most important thing. You never know who may need to hear your story, maybe going through the same thing. Go out and look for people's stories. If there's something like, I'm dealing with this, I know God maybe have done this or that, or maybe I can't recall, then look for other people's stories where God's done. Guess what? He'll do it in your life. And you may think, you don't know what I've done. God doesn't care about me, but He does. you know what? I'm not going to say he doesn't care about what you did, because he does. He cares about you. But not, he doesn't care about it in the same way that you may think. He actually wants to take it away from you and free you from the enslavement of that, the enslavement of the things that you've done, maybe the enslavement of insecurities in your life, maybe the enslavement of the negative thoughts, or whatever it may be. And all you have to do is just say yes to him, pray to him, ask him, and he will be there for you and listen to you and accept you and receive you and give you the gift of freedom, of salvation. He didn't just save us just for the future sometime when we get to go to heaven. He saved you for this moment right now. He saved you for this life right now, that you can live a life of freedom and not be living in that life of enslavement. So I hope that you take that into consideration today. Feel free to just comment that you need prayer about something, or private message me. I'll get back with you and I'll pray for you. Feel free to share your stories in the comments, or share your stories on your own Facebook pages, or wherever you feel comfortable doing, because you don't know who might need that hope. Because there is hope in the miracles that God's done in the past, the miracles that he's going to do in your life. Trust me, he will. So I hope that you just take that to heart today. Have hope. Lean on him. And have a great day.